Okay. Had a little bit of, I'm not sure it was a technology, might have been a age problem. Probably might have been me. But back again, I want to talk tonight about when things don't change. I want to talk about, but when things don't change. Um, there's some prevalent attitudes going on, I think, in the body of Christ, and I know probably even in the world, um, that has a lot to do with God's interaction with us and our response to Him. And because we still must understand his ways are not our ways. His We're living in his kingdom and we're learning to navigate in his kingdom, in his kingdom. And as I was doing studying all this week, I began to be strongly impressed with the idea of expectations and things that they realize. And how do we understand what it is to live in God's kingdom, to understand his ways? It is said that he made known his ways to Moses and his acts to the children of people. As you know, Israel is a type, and when they were in the wilderness, better still, when they were in the Egyptian captivity for over 400 years, they become accustomed to the Egyptians, their ways, and pretty soon they forgot where they had come from because they had been so separated from their origin so long, they thought that Egyptian captivity was the norm. They became dependent upon Pharaoh. And pretty soon they thought that the captivity was the normal existence. And so when Moses comes along with declaring that God has sent a word to deliver them, strange things happened. First of all, they resisted him and they commanded that he prove that he had heard from God. As you know the story, uh, God gave him his name. So when Moses uttered the name of God, which no one knew, it was validation. And of course, through mighty acts, miraculous things, God brought them out of Egypt. But when they were delivered and they came into freedom, because they did not know and they were so accustomed to the captivity and the ways and concept, they did not know the ways of God. And even Moses did not know. Moses had seen the miracles, but he didn't know everything. So, you know, there was a time when Moses asked the Lord to show me your ways. He said, you say that you know me by name, but show me your ways. He said, and if you don't go with us, don't take us up. And the Lord set Moses in the cleft of a rock. That's an allegory. I mean that he put him in a place that he could speak to him. And he said, I'm the Lord. And he said many things, but he said, I visit the iniquities of the fathers upon the children to the fourth to 10th generation. Now, that quote right there has been a source of great misunderstanding in the Christian circles, especially when it comes to generational curses or when I think of familiar diseases. Because two prophets later came along and said, I want y'all to know something in Israel, something has changed. Because once they had been delivered and got out of captivity and they had began to be where God has placed them, they still believe that if the fathers did something wrong, the Lord visited upon the children. And these prophets, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, come along and said, you've heard of old, the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. You all know what that means, don't you? Fathers did something wrong, and now the Lord punishes the children. Then he said, you will no longer utter that proverb. From now on, the soul that sinneth will die. Now, we have to understand progressions in God, and that's been very critical. Um, we are New Testament believers, not Old Testament saints. We have to understand that because when you look at and read the Old Testament, the patriarchy, um, the church that I was in this weekend, they thought that prayer was warfare. They really locked into that. And there's only one biblical example that even suggests that. And that has to do with the patriarch. What's his name now? Tell me. In the lion's den now. You know, one who prayed. Daniel. When Daniel prayed, and it said his prayer was hindered but by the prince of Persia. It never said the prince of Persia was the devil, and never said how he hindered it. And they use that one Old Testament example as a New Testament precedent. When you move from the old to the new, things change. We no longer have to go to a prophet or priest to get a word from God. The Holy Ghost has been poured out upon us. We no longer have to go to a place because God is in all places. Um, there's no longer patriarchy. There's no longer the dominance of men over women. That was old covenant. In fact, it was not God's original intention. In the beginning, God gave them. You understand? So as I was researching all of this and looking at everything, I came across the idea because when I was in the church this weekend, um, I spoke a whole lot about how we navigate through things of God. And the idea came from me is that sometimes what we're expecting doesn't happen. What do we do with it? Um, you all may remember the civil rights movement. And I remember when it began, and there were a lot of expectations surrounding that. That once integration came, they thought there would be a significant change. But people begin to understand that change is not always radical; it's evolutionary, and that the mindsets of people, it takes time for that to happen. And so some things pretty much remain the same. I went to South Africa, Sandra and I, in '87 and '88, and when Mandela was still in prison, shortly thereafter he was released. And the people were expecting a radical transformation. They were expecting, in fact, they rejoiced. They thought that Mandela had a messianic complex in a lot of ways. But Mandela was a spiritual leader. He was not necessarily a political force, although he became the chief leader in the country. But he was used of God to bring about a transformation in people's spirit and their minds. And it took a while for someone else to come along the line. And the critical thing that we're looking at now is that when things don't change, when things remain the same, this has to do with spiritual matters. The people that were with this weekend, as I said before, they a lot of disappointment. Uh, Things they'd been expecting wasn't happening as quick as they thought they would. And you've heard me say that God is consistent but not predictable. That was profound to them. They said some things to me later afterwards, and it was tremendous rejoicing. They said, "Explain it to us." I said, "Well, he doesn't always do things the same way. He does things differently." I said, "But you have to get in your mind that God doesn't test you or prove you, and God means you well." Can you say that? God means me well. He means us well. He wants the best for us. He really does. He didn't want to put you in generational curses. He's not going to punish you for the mistakes of your predecessors. He doesn't. He didn't put sickness and disease upon you. That's not God. God deals with rebellion. You know, when you're rebellious. I just spoke to you all some time ago about the thing of uh, mental challenges. Dementia, and how that there's certain things we can do to make our brains healthy. And that was very revolutionary to them. I said the scientists have proven many times that dementia is not just the automatic consequence of aging, that it can be not only prevented, but it can also be reversed. And, the scientists, they talk about meditation. They won't talk about Christianity. They talk about meditation, psychic phenomena, certain foods that you eat, exercise. They talked about the way you feed your brain. That's what they're talking about. They act as if the brain is a muscle. And so for them, the brain determines what's going on with the mind. Because remember that the mind is the part of the brain that thinks, that reasons, that, that's the conclusion. That's the mind. Paul never talks about the brain. He always talks about the mind. Let this mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. And so I said to them, as I've shared with you, that we thought always that the brain controls the mind. So if you get a stroke or high blood pressure, or if the brain is overtaxed with things, doesn't get a lot of circulation, then that's when people forget. They can't remember. I said, but let's consider the fact that the mind can influence the brain. I said, if the scientists can say if we meditate, that's all they know. If you meditate, if you exercise, and if you say certain things, they think that increases the brain. I said, what do you think would happen if we talked and rehearsed and recited the things that God has done for us and God has done to us? And they got extremely excited. I said, what if you start talking about the promises of God? Remember them, write them down, rehearse them. I said, because toxic thoughts, toxic thinking affects the brain. How much more redemptive thinking, redemptive thoughts? And I explained it to them. Well, this is another situation here. Many times because our minds have been so oriented that if we do this, we'll get this. If we sow, we'll reap. And we learn by now, once again, the way God answers prayer is not always the same. And so when I say, what do you do when things don't change, when things remain the same? I said, you must come down to a conclusion here. They may remain the same in our sight, but they are redemptive. That is, God is at work. And perhaps sometimes things that we think should change ought not to change. In God's kingdom, Saint, that you heard me talk about it, you all know there's paradoxes. A paradox is a concept that makes sense in God's kingdom, but not in the world. For example, in the world, you are great if people serve you. You measure your life by the things that you have. Nothing wrong with that. Even when it comes to the church, we measure the success of the church by its buildings, its geographic location, its finances, the number of people, and all of that. But that's not how you measure the effectiveness of the church in the kingdom. In God's kingdom, the effectiveness of the church is measured by the fact it gets answers to its prayers. That's number one. And then number two, it can receive and communicate divine information. Now, those are powerful things. And there are a lot of things that go on with that idea of getting answers to your prayer, especially when he gives you an understanding what prayers he will answer and what prayers that he won't answer. He won't answer prayers that request him to do what he's empowered us to do. Or he tells us that prayer is not warfare. In fact, warfare, you heard me say, is not what you do on your knees, it's what you do on your feet. Warfare is not fighting demons. It's not talking to the devil. Why would you talk to a liar? He's not telling you the truth. And believe it or not, the evil spirits are not disturbed by what we say to them or about them. We can rebuke them all day. I know that's a tremendous revelation to people that are in deliverance. They're not disturbed by that at all. But you can curse them, swear at them, quote scriptures to them, rebuke them. Don't mean a thing. You know what influences them or shatters them? It's when you obey God. Your obedience to God. Now, to obey the Lord, you have to know what you have to do to make him happy. That's very important. What does it make God happy? One, if you don't complain. Complaining bothers him. Israel, they complain. That's what he said, I'm going to kill them. I brought them out and now they're complaining. Because when you complain, you're saying that God is not able to do what he's promised. And believe it or not, when you complain, you're not creative. I mean, you know that. When you're complaining, you're not thinking clearly. Because you're thinking about the problem rather than the solution. The second thing is that when you stay in your lane, when you stay true to what he's called you to do. And sometimes that shifts. It changes. It changes. I started out in ministry, Sandra and I, as pastors. I could sit down in my office with some people came in. I could let them talk for an hour. I could listen to them, pray for them. They'd call me 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd counsel them and pray for them. I'd go visit them at the hospital, visit their mother, the father, the uncle, aunt, the dogs, their cats. I mean, I go dedicate houses and buildings. I'd be flying on an airplane, and y'all remember my secretary, Charlotte. Charlotte was the main steward of Delta Airlines. She trained the stewardess. And she'd tell all the stewardess on my flight, my pastor's going to be there on my flight. And so I thought they would, look out for me, put me in business class. And I never forget on the flight, I was going a long flight, and this little lady came down and kneeled beside me. She said, "Are you Pastor Kirby?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." I was anxious. I said, "Yes, I'm here. I'm here." She said, "Would you come with me?" "Oh, yes. Oh, yes." So I went to get my luggage. She said, "Oh, you can let that stay there." So I walked with her. We went up back then. They had those dumbwaiters. You remember those big, they get on the plane? So she pressed the button, and I got into the dumbwaiter, and I'm going on. I said, "This ain't business class. This ain't business class." So I got downstairs, and one came down, and she's crying, and she was counseling me about relationship. And another came down. 5 of them came down. I counseled all of them. In fact, I counseled all of them for about an hour and a half. And they put me back on the little dumbwaiter and put me back in my seat. So when I got home, I called Charlotte. I said, "Charlotte, I thought they were going to put me in business class. Did you tell him? She said, I told him you were my pastor and that you're a prophet. What? When you don't complain, but when you find out what is it that you do well, and she knew that I counsel people well. She knew that I give a prophetic word well. And she knew I enjoyed what I was doing. So you make God happy when you stay in your lane, when you don't complain, when you stay connected to people that He's joined you to. And that was big with these people. I said because y'all know there's some people we don't like. Some people we don't think we need, but God has joined us to people. So as I was talking to them about how you make God happy and how God can let you get answers to your prayer and how He can enable you, number one, to totally obey Him. Now, you can't obey the Lord unless He gives you wisdom. Revelation is the treatment to your impatience. Whenever you get impatient, what you need is a word from God. Because most of the time our impatience is due to the fact that we don't see things as we ought to see them. You understand? We don't see them as we ought to see them. So when I said that, when things don't change sociologically, they didn't change. Things in the culture. Laws change, but not the application of it. Sometimes in spiritual things. I've been with churches where the Lord has brought great deliverance, but there was no change. You all know this by now. God can do a lot of things. You can be in great distress, and He could turn it around. But until you turn away from what you're doing, He won't turn it around. Now, I always use the cathedral as a model. You all were part of it. You know, He brought deliverance. He did it in 3 years. That was miraculous, what He did in 3 years. But there were key people that didn't turn away. And so consequently, they began to reap the consequences of their rebellion. Now, when things don't change, when they remain the same, they no longer look like they're going to be temporary. They're going to be around a while. How do I respond to it? And you have choices. You have choices. When you have been believing the Lord for something, it could be a medical issue, because I had people come down for it. It's a very large church. So you had thousands of people there. And so, to get them to come down, I said, the Lord said there's going to be healing here. And I said, you could stand up or you could come down. Boy, tons of them came down. I said, now, we're not going to take all day. Not going to take all day. And the people came down. I said, now, some of you will say, I've done this before. And, without results. I said, well, then you're going to be hindered unless you can, number one, just because something, a no doesn't mean never. You understand that now? That's a good phrase. No doesn't mean never. Just because it didn't happen this time doesn't mean that it won't happen. Of course, there's times in God. Y'all understand that now? There are times in God. There are times that God does things. There are times that He doesn't. I've seen times when the Lord didn't allow us to have certain medical treatments. And turn around later, we did. Like you mentioned about the surgery right now. Well, why didn't that happen before? People, they examine you, they see things, because a good cardiologist knows when it's the time. And then he knows what to do. That's why you heard me say, pray that your doctor will know what to do, what not to do, that he can have wisdom. You understand that? And so I said, for some of you, you'll say that, this hadn't happened before. We came down, people prayed for us. I said, that's true. That's true. I said, but keep believing. Keep believing. And people were healed. They were healed. Now, here's a challenge. For them, they were hindered in their beliefs because they had tried it before and it had not worked. You got to hear this part here now. You can never allow a disappointment to control your future expectation. You can never do that, especially if the Lord has made a promise to you. His promise is that He will sustain you. You understand what that means? And how many of you know by now, He does sustain you the same way. He does it differently. I've seen God do things without money. I've seen God do things in most unusual way. The ways of the Lord are peculiar to understanding. So I said to them, I said, remove that from your memory bank. Stop locking your mind. I did this before. I said, but each time you come expecting and believing. Now, what happens now many times when things had not happened, we still have the challenge. I said, but I'm going to give you a principle. God can sustain you even when the problem doesn't go away. That's something called the grace of God. Now, I don't understand how that works, children. That's a mystery to me. Sometimes he can sustain you by a gift of faith. It's a supernatural rending of the Holy Spirit to make you hang on to something, hang on to a promise, especially if the Lord has made a promise to you, that you would travel to certain parts of the world, that you would see your great-great-grandchildren, that you would meet certain people, that you will achieve certain purposes. And it has not happened. And so I said to them, I said, be glad when all your promises have not been fulfilled. Because you got to hear this part. If a promise of God is a commitment to your future, then you should be happy when you still have promises out there. I'm going to quote the scripture. For the joy that was set before him, talking about Jesus, he endured the cross and the contradiction of sinners against himself. Did you understand what he's saying now? Something was set before him. And that's why he endured the cross and the contradiction of sinners. Because what was before him was greater than what was with him. Now, when the Lord shows you what's before you, that which comes alongside of you won't overcome you. So you should be happy when you still have unfulfilled promise. Do you understand the revelation? You should be happy. Because remember now, as my good bishop said, a promise of God is an investment in your future. If God has made a promise to you, something you ought to do, to see, place to go, he said, in essence, I'm going to bring to pass. But he didn't say how he's going to do it. So when things don't change, you have to go back and remember the promise. Now, the promise is greater than the process. Did you hear what I said now? The process is how it happens. The promise is greater than that. I've been perplexed many times. Promises the Lord has made to me, and I see some things that don't change. But what I know doesn't change is the promise of the Lord. It stays. But the way in which he brings it to pass may change, even time. I share with you, God is time specific. He's geographically specific. Sometimes he does things in Georgia. Sometimes he does things in Alabama and California. You follow me now? Okay. Sometimes he does things because we are connected with certain people. And until those things come to pass, what keeps you is the promise. So when things don't change, I would strongly encourage you to keep before your mind, not the idea that things are the same, but the idea that the promise that he made has not yet been fulfilled. Does that make sense to y'all? You got to get that in your mind now, because that's a tremendous insight of revelation that would help us to navigate through things. When things don't happen, I think, and when it comes to spiritual matters, there are things I know when the Lord had promised us that we would travel the world, and here I was as a pastor at the Chapel Hill, then the cathedral. I was talking to people, counseling people. If I did take a trip, I was penalized because they felt I should be there on Sunday to pray, and to lead the people. They felt I was wasting my time babysitting little churches. But I knew that was God's will for me. So spiritually, I was a pastor for about 18 years. Spiritually. But what was before was this promise. I had a dream once. In my dream, Sandra and I came home to our house. It was a large house, and it was full of people from all over the world, all over the world. There were so many people in the house. They were standing in the windows and the doors, out the yards. And I said, what are all these people doing in my house? And then I awake. It was a dream. A house speaks of your life. I'm not going to standardize that. It speaks of your ministry. All those different people said that our lives would intersect with people from all over the world. There would be a bunch of them. Now, this was a dream that had come to reinforce what God had said to me. And then I found out that's what happened. I had a dream once I was running from a lion. In my dreams, animals talk. And the lion was chasing me. And I was running. And then I stopped. And I turned and picked up a stone and crushed the lion's head. So that's weird. Then I later found out that the lion spoke of authority. It spoke of a calling. And I was running from my calling. But then I stopped and crushed the lion's head, which meant I stopped and I accepted the challenge. You follow me now? So many times, spiritually, when things are not happening as quickly as you think they should, you got to always keep before you the promise that he made. Because I'm going to tell you, children, he watches over his word to fulfill it. Trust me, he fulfills his word. But the way that he does is a challenge. So when things don't change, whether it's social sphere, when it's your social welfare, when it's spiritual, what do? Well, I'm going to give you some things, options. Number one, you can quit. Um, Frustration can be a strong motivation to do things. Um, but the antidote to frustration is revelation. When the Lord speaks a word to you, when he says things like this, you're in the right place, you're doing what you should be doing, and everything's going to be all right. When he says the decision that you made is my decision, but I'm not seeing the fruit. Because now we're told to measure it by the fruit. Well, the fruit is strange. He said, remember now, y'all ever eaten ackee and saltfish? You know about ackee and saltfish, but Steve. You know, you don't eat that stuff before the time. You know, you eat it before the time, you won't have that experience again. Y'all understand what I mean? Only have that experience once. You understand that? But believe it or not, if you wait until it ages, well, there's sometimes some fruit if you experience it before the time, but yet still he gives you a word of wisdom that says, "You're where I want you. You're doing what I want you to do, and everything is fine." But it don't look good. Now here's a principle of God, and I'll share this with you. And when I shared with the people past Sunday, they were beside themselves.